25 years ago, two very different American horror movies showed audiences how, when it came to the genre, less could be more. By the standards of most bloated studio movies, M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense was a lean and resourceful thriller that harkened back to the visual and narrative economy of classic entertainers like Val Lewton. The film was ultimately a triumph of suggestion over spectacle, but while the elegance of Shyamalan's storytelling was a genuine genre breakthrough, a longer shadow would be cast by an even smaller movie. The industry-shaking minimalism of the Blair Witch Project, which existed at the intersection of shifting trends in documentary production, online marketing, and ambient millennial anxieties about the unknowability of the world around us, was the summer's true paradigm shift. It would be wrong to say that the Blair Witch Project invented, or even perfected, found footage horror, but the film's 25th anniversary offers a good opportunity to examine a potent contemporary horror subgenre, including a few movies made under the sign of the Blair Witch Project, many of which you've probably seen, and a few of which you probably haven't. At its heart, Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust is a work of political cinema, or at least politically adjacent. The director was inspired by what he perceived as sensationalistic Italian media coverage of left-wing activist groups in the 1970s like the Red Brigade, as well as by the exploitation/ethnographic films of Jacopetti and Prosperi. The latter duo had popularized a genre known as Mondo, which blended travelogue-style documentary with outrageous shock content, blurring the line between fact and fiction, and also between empathy and exploitation. The premise for Cannibal Holocaust was simple and ingenious. It was basically, what if a Mondo-style documentary crew ended up getting massacred by their subjects, in this case an indigenous tribe living in a remote area of the Amazon. Cannibal Holocaust's thrifty but scrupulous realism goes beyond a question of mere style. The film contains sequences of extreme cruelty to animals that are quite difficult to watch and transgress certain ethical boundaries. When the movie was released, however, its ostensible problems were considerably bigger. Deodato was actually charged with multiple counts of murder, until the authorities were convinced that the film's brutal killings had been staged. Whether Cannibal Holocaust genuinely satirizes first-world racism or documentary ethics, or whether it uses the idea of critique as a pretext for simple depravity, is hard to say. Critics have argued over this movie for a long time, and that argument's not going to be cornered anytime soon. Still, its legacy is vast. Cannibal Holocaust is an uncannily convincing, plausible film. It's got a tremendously nasty sense of humor, and it belongs on any list of the most influential horror movies ever made, found footage or not. A few years before Oliver Stone seized upon the idea of a serial murderer picaresque with natural-born killers, a team of Belgian filmmakers tackled the same subject with superior wit and craft in Manites Dog. The film's protagonist, Ben, is a sociopath who has lassoed a film crew into documenting his crimes, which grow increasingly horrific as the shoot goes on. Similarly, the filmmakers, whether out of professional ambition or psychic damage or some combination of the two, become more complicit in the violence to the point that they're actually participating in it. Not only does the ragged 16mm black and white cinematography cinch the idea of a real low-budget production, it heightens the horror of the violence. The film was met with a notorious NC-17 rating in America, but it was also praised by critics as well as the likes of Quentin Tarantino, who ended up citing Manites Dog as an influence on natural-born killers. This is a movie where one's mileage may vary in terms of sense of humor, but there's a slapstick quality to some of the staging that, really goes a long way towards putting across both how horrific what we're watching is and the extent that it is just an extended, sick joke on declining standards of spectatorship. A genuine pop cultural phenomenon in 1999, the Blair Witch Project splits the difference between experimentation and a kind of hucksterism, a sort of carnival quality. Here is a movie where there really was nothing to fear but fear itself, and a fair number of people who put down their money to see what the fuss is all about may have ended up feeling cheated. Not only do we never see the Blair Witch, but there is a reading of the film in which the legendary figure isn't even real, that she is just the metastasized anxiety of a group of amateur filmmakers who really don't know what they're doing. They're too arrogant and inept to read a map or frame a shot coherently. This kind of ambiguity doesn't usually set the box office on fire, especially in a year that had special effects breakthroughs like The Matrix. But a combination of savvy marketing, careful craftsmanship, and again, these percolating millennial fears about the authenticity of filmed images, the gap between fact and fiction, helped push the movie beyond the festival circuit and cult appreciation. That summer, the Blair Witch Project ended up on the cover of major news magazines and was hailed as the beginning of a new era in indie cinema, like Clerks and Pulp Fiction before it. The recent and much publicized revelation that the film's stars were left out of the profit participation sours the underdog narrative considerably. Without the cast's brilliant improvisation, both in terms of dialogue and actually handling the cameras, telling the story as it unfolded during the shoot, Blair Witch Project would probably be a footnote in the history of found footage rather than its keynote entry. Probably no country exported more great horror movies to the West at the turn of the millennium than Japan, including major works by genre masters like Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Takashi Miike. The genius of 2005's Noroy The Curse, written and directed by Koji Shiraishi, is how it fuses the elegance of seminal J-horror titles with the quasi-documentary conventions cultivated in the US by the Blair Witch Project and its many, many clones. The film is presented as the last will and testament of a popular paranormal researcher who, we learn at the film's outset, disappeared after the death of his wife in a tragic fire. From there, Noroy keeps piling on enough plot points for an entire miniseries, filtered through a phantasmagorical mediascape that satirizes Japanese reality television and news broadcasts, while also suggesting its capacity to channel or become subordinate to demonic evil. Now, because what we're seeing is being presented as a finished product, Shiraishi is able to exploit documentary conventions and cliches instead of leaning on them. The film feels so plausible for so long that by the time it transitions into hallucinatory horror, by which I mean it starts showing us things that really shouldn't exist and we shouldn't be able to see, we're already all in. The technique is as impeccable as the ideas are provocative. Also, and this is not a small point, Noroy is actually genuinely scary, integrating J-horror style imagery in ways that even seasoned viewers won't see coming and won't forget after it does. For a while, it seemed like the lesson of the Blair Witch Project would be that lightning couldn't strike twice, much less be captured in a bottle. A decade's worth of found footage imitators yielded precious few movies in Blair Witch's artistic or box office weight class. Enter the unheralded but resourceful writer-director Oren Peli, armed with little more than a couple of unknown actors, his own residence, and digital cameras, created a superbly unnerving tale of possession, structured in a simple but effective visual pattern. In fact, Paranormal Activity is almost a structuralist film. By day, it's a brightly lit and kind of strategically banal portrait of domestic cohabitation. At night, it transforms into a fixed camera, surveillance-style nightmare, observing the characters as they sleep through the intrusions of an invisible, yet still discernible entity. The film is long on suggestion, short on gore, an industrious little scare machine that gets the most out of its minimalism. The legend is that no less than Steven Spielberg was freaked out when he screened it, and DreamWorks, who originally acquired it just to remake it, ended up parlaying a brilliant grassroots marketing campaign, turning a cheap acquisition into what at the time was the most profitable horror movie ever made. And the movie's marketing went back to the days of William Castle, the idea of almost filming people in the audience, responding with terror to what they saw on the screen, and using that to sell the film instead of the actual images from it. Paranormal Activity has spawned a number of sequels, a couple of which are actually pretty good. I love the bit in Paranormal Activity 3, which is a period piece set on the earlier side of the 20th century where the camera gets attached to an oscillating fan, which creates the idea of a disembodied back and forth tracking shot, but the original is still the best. Arguably the most underrated found footage horror movie of its era, if not all time, Joel Anderson's melancholy mock documentary is a chronicle of a disappearance. Its subjects are an Australian couple reeling in the wake of the drowning death of their beloved teenage daughter. Their grief quickly gives way to fear and curiosity and actually a little bit of morbid hope, when the late girl's brother claims to have captured video of her ghost wandering their property in the dead of night. The framing devices here are deceptively sophisticated. Not only do Lake Mungo's made-for-TV textures ring truer than the vast majority of similarly structured films, something it has in common with Noroy The Curse, but the script keeps finding brilliant and unnerving ways to expand the scope of the footage and the point of view and the authorship. In addition to the central supernatural mystery, the movie works as a meditation on different forms of recording and viewing, culminating in one of the saddest and scariest uses of cell phone cinematography that I've ever seen. A close encounter that on one hand answers a set of narrative questions while raising a whole host of other ones. Critics and cultists continue to hold Lake Mungo up as a kind of secret masterpiece. Its profile remains lower than it should. Eventually it might find the wide audience that it deserves. In the early 2000s, again in the wake of the Blair Witch Project, the race was on to apply the found footage aesthetic to as many different kinds of genre films as possible, including big studio product, to the point where Matt Reeves' Cloverfield attempted to fulfill a vexing paradox as the first POV blockbuster, asking what would Godzilla look like if it was shot by a guy on the street. More successful, and considerably richer in terms of concept and theme, was Josh Trank's diabolically funny Chronicle, in which a trio of high school pals document their own alien-assisted mutation into telekinetic mutants. It's carried by way of an AV club meeting, and it's really pretty good. The smartest thing about Chronicle is how its anti-hero's ability are used to account for the camera's perspectives. Not only is Dane DeHaan's character a budding superpowered sociopath, but he's also an auteur, shooting himself and his actions at dramatic angles, telekinetically creating tracking shots, and at one point commandeering an entire fleet of digital cameras during a fight with his former best friend. The movie also deserves a shout out for one of the greatest and funniest jump scares in found footage history, involving a weightless game of touch football being interrupted by the intrusion at 30,000 feet of a commercial jet airliner. It's a startling and surreal image that not only resonated in a post-9/11 zeitgeist, but suggested the dark side of the era's stratospheric superhero sagas. By the start of the 2010s, M. Night Shyamalan had gone from the new Spielberg after The Sixth Sense to a kind of pop cultural punchline.
What? No!
Reeling after a series of low-grossing studio flops, he decided to downsize, refine his process, and make a comeback. Shot for the meager sum of $5 million, in collaboration with the then-emergent art horror specialists at Blumhouse, The Visit is a movie that leverages the found footage aesthetic in an innovative and ingenious direction. It uses the inexperience of its camera-wielding adolescent protagonists as a pretense to deploy all kinds of unsettling and off-center compositions. The DV images, we might say, are perfectly imperfect. Their ineptitude becomes a cover for Shyamalan's aptitude, and the story, which takes place primarily at a cabin in the woods, threads fairy tale tropes through more universal anxieties about aging and mental health, topped off with a bizarre and welcome streak of humor. It's a risky movie on a lot of levels, but the risks paid off. It generated a massive return on investment. Critics hailed it as a return to form, despite the fact that, at least as far as Shyamalan was concerned, the form was something radically new. Shyamalan hasn't returned to found footage really since then, but the movie clearly has re-energized his creative process to the point where he is almost as acclaimed and successful as an auteur now in the 2020s as he was around the time of The Sixth Sense, and it's the really, really brilliant exploitation of the found footage format in The Visit that made that reversal possible. The contemporary evolution of found footage into so-called screen life horror, meaning movies that unfold entirely in a virtual screen space, peaked early with Unfriended, a tale of demonic revenge set entirely on a laptop, which is, as used within the movie, a pretty vast space that just keeps opening up different chasms and channels and pathways for you to follow. Every time a window opens, every time an app opens up, it activates another part of the story. The narrative is shaped around a group Skype chat, whose members are keeping a dark and mutual secret. As it turns out, there's a literal ghost in the machine, and soon the characters' keyboards and webcams become weaponized as tools of psychological and physical torture. Beloved by both mall-hopping, thrill-seeking teenagers and also film studies majors bewitched by its zeitgeist surfing aesthetics, Unfriended was a surprise hit, and it yielded a sequel, subtitled Dark Web, which took the same premise and politicized it. Instead of an obviously supernatural antagonist, you get a ruthless cyber hacker, and a movie that's more about the predations of late capitalism than the revenge of some kind of a ghost. As much as I like the Unfriended films, you have to sort of say that they're goofy, but their goofiness doesn't get in the way of how unsettling they are. They prod our various virtual comfort zones. They turn the internet into anything but a safe space. When you're watching them, you almost feel as if you're participating in them. You can see the text as they pop up. You feel a sense of anticipation. You can almost feel the trackpad under your fingers. It's simple, but it's uncanny. Some horror movies accidentally capture their cultural moment, whereas some are tailored precisely to its specifications. Exhibit A of the second kind would be Rob Savage's COVID-era Creepout House, which runs exactly the length of a Skype call. It's a spiritual sequel, some might say ripoff, of the Unfriended series, once again featuring characters interacting in a completely virtual space. It's a Zoom call rather than a Skype call. Originally produced as a viral video short, it deploys the screen life aesthetic with wit and efficiency. The ideas of a kind of playful girls' night seance under lockdown gone wrong. A lot of the dialogue is improvised, and the actors, who are all housebound according to quarantine rules, all served as their own makeup artists, lighting and stunt coordinators. They set up little special effects routines within their space in front of their webcam, so it's an amazing piece of collaboration. On a plot level, Host is predictable, but it has some genuinely innovative scares, really interesting use of screen space, various apps, filters, backgrounds, and what's probably the first and only death by laptop keyboard in cinema history. It's a vicious sight gag. It belongs in the Bad Taste Hall of Fame, and you'll know it when you see it. The subgenre known as cosmic horror, as its name suggests, usually requires a broad canvas. Robbie Finch's The Outwaters takes a minimalist approach to a maximalist concept with occasionally terrifying results. Like Cannibal Holocaust and the Blair Witch Project, the setup is a film crew looking for footage in the wrong place at the wrong time, in this case a desolate stretch of New Mexico desert that's supposed to serve as the backdrop for a music video. Camped out in the middle of nowhere, the filmmakers begin to experience and document strange phenomena that at first suggest some kind of geological or meteorological happening. From there, and this is not a spoiler, The Outwaters plunges from an easily apprehended reality into a kind of supernatural purgatory, one whose images can't be chalked up to psychosis since they're being filmed by a digital camera. By the end, The Outwaters delivers the goods in terms of metaphysics and also gore, but the found footage conceit is actually at its freakiest before we really have any sense of what's going on. In the most harrowing sequence, we're shown an infinite field of inky, starless blackness, illuminated one tiny circle at a time by a flashbulb beam. An image steeped in dread and sinister possibility. It not just weaponizes the camera, but our worst expectations against us. There's obviously some movies that we didn't have time to include, including possibly some of your favorites. Let us know what we missed, what we should have added, what you'd like to see in the next one of these or in the next few of these, if there's any genres or categories of movies they'd like to see covered. Until then, Adam Nayman for The Ringer saying thanks very much.